The narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. Poe started the novel in 1836, and the first few chapters, those chapters that Pym refers to in the preface, were published in early 1837. The rest of the novel was written during the winter of 1837 when Poe moved to New York. Poe had intended to collect a number of his early short stories into a volume titled Tales of the Folio Club in the 1830s. His intention was to make the collection into a series of tales presented by the members of the literary club, designed as burlesques of contemporary literary criticism. He couldn't sell the idea to a publisher, however, partly because Poe had already published most of the stories in various magazines, partly because the publishers felt that Americans were more interested in longer works of fiction, and partly because they felt that Poe's style and huge vocabulary were beyond the comprehension of the average reader. The response inspired Poe to create his only one and incomplete novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. Despite Poe's ambition to produce a novel-length work, there were many places in the novel that seemed flawed, which seems to be a clear indication that Poe felt uncomfortable with writing novels, which is why he never really published any complete novels. Even this one just seems to end in mid-sentence, although we'll discuss in the course whether that was intentional. Let's look at the title page. What was Poe doing with such a lengthy subtitle? Is it an advertising ploy to entice people to buy the book? The formatting of the title even looks like a ship. Or perhaps Poe is imitating Jonathan Swift in Gulliver's Travels. I prefer to think the latter, since Poe clearly liked to imitate and improve on other writers. On page 1007, what is the purpose of the preface? For starters, the first line indicates to the readers that Pym survives the tale, since he returns to tell it. Also, when Poe published the novel in serial form, he intended to create one of his famous hoaxes in trying to convince people that the story is a true one. The preface attempts to create a realistic framework for the story.
Another reason was that the incidents to be narrated were of a nature so positively marvelous that, unsupported as my assertions must necessarily be, except by the evidence of a single individual, and he a half-breed Indian, I could only hope for belief among my family and those of my friends who have had reason through life to put faith in my veracity, the probability being that the public at large would regard what I should put forth as merely imprudent and ingenious fiction.
What does this quotation remind you of? Yes, the opening to Manuscript Found in a Bottle. Once again, the story ultimately deals with a voyage to the Antarctic, and once again, that cautious word marvelous is thrown about. But this time, however, the narrator has returned to tell us his story is really true. And being published serially in a magazine, it is plausible that audiences initially accepted the story as a true account of a seafaring adventure.
Among those gentlemen in Virginia who expressed the greatest interest in my statement, more particularly in regard to that portion of it which related to the Antarctic Ocean, was Mr. Poe, lately editor of the Southern Literary Messenger, a monthly magazine published by Mr. Thomas W. White in this city of Richmond.
In a rarity for Poe, he identifies the narrator of the story by name, Arthur Gordon Pym. And as a literary device, he has the narrator write a preface in which he identifies Poe as the editor of the work, quoting Poe as one of the gentlemen who urged Pym to publish his work. This is a further deception in the creation of illusion of reality. Quote, under the garb of fiction, Pym agrees to let Poe write his story, but publish it as fiction. We have a postmodern device here. Poe is writing fiction, pretending that it is a true story written by a fictitious character named Pym, who is asking Poe to publish his story as fiction. This is a device that we see later in some of Borges' stories, or in one of my favorite Julie Andrews movies, Victor Victoria, in which Julie Andrews plays a woman who pretends to be a man who dresses up as a woman and sings like a woman. Postmodern indeed. Then, to make the matter more convincing, Pym claims that since the public believes the story even though they're told that it is fiction, lied to, he agrees to finish his story as a factual account of his adventures, which ironically some people believed was factual. The final version of the novel, as noted here, was published in July 1838. The novel was initially published without Poe's name and included the preface to explain the serialized early chapters. It notes that the work is the true adventures of Arthur Gordon Pym and that the early serialization was mistakenly published under the garb of fiction by the Southern Literary Messenger, with which Poe was no longer affiliated. The supposed author's name, Arthur Gordon Pym, can be read as autobiographical. Arthur equals Edgar, Gordon equals Allen, Pym equals Poe. The novel begins with Arthur Gordon Pym, a name similar to Edgar Allan Poe, departing from Edgartown, Massachusetts on Martha's Vineyard, a real town not made up to connect the author Arthur to the author Edgar. Nevertheless, Poe's choice of the town of Edgartown does suggest an interpretation that Arthur, also known as Edgar, is sailing away from himself. This is a voyage of discovery, of exploration into the great unknown. Indeed, it proves in the end to be a voyage beyond the final veil of existence. The middle name of Gordon, in replacing Poe's connection to the Allen family, could be read as a reference to George Gordon Byron, a poet whom Poe deeply admired. The scene where Pym disguises himself from his grandfather indicates a desire for Poe to free himself from family obligation, and specifically scorning the patrimony of his foster father, John Allen. Dates are also relevant to this autobiographical reading. According to the text, Pym arrives at the island of Tessagh on January 19th, Poe's birthday. Scholars, including Burton R. Poland and Richard Wilbur, suggest that the character of Augustus was based on Poe's childhood friend Ebenezer Burling, or on Poe's brother William Henry Leonard Poe, who served in South America and elsewhere as a sailor aboard the USS Macedonian. In the novel, the date of Augustus's death corresponds to the death date of Poe's brother. The first chapter features Pym's sloop named the Ariel, the name of a character once played by Poe's mother, Eliza Poe, and of course, the spirit who helps Prospero in Shakespeare's The Tempest. I want to go over some sources from Wikipedia. In order to present the tale as an authentic exploration, Poe used a number of travel journals that proliferated at the time he was writing the novel. Poe's most significant source was the explorer Jeremiah N. Reynolds, whose work, Address on the Subject of a Surveying and Exploring Expedition to the Pacific Ocean and the South Seas, was reviewed favorably by Poe in January 1837. Poe used about 700 words of Reynolds' address in chapter 16, almost half the length of the chapter. In 1843, Poe also praised Reynolds in a review of a brief account of the discoveries and results of the United States Exploring Expedition, printed in Graham's magazine. It is unclear if Poe and Reynolds had ever met, but the legend says that shortly before Poe's mysterious death, in his delirium he called out the name Reynolds, though the incident is unclear and possibly apocryphal. One theory says Poe meant Jeremiah Reynolds, reflecting the explorer's influence. In chapter 16, Poe recounts Captain James Cook's circumnavigation of the globe aboard the Resolution that reached 17 degrees 10 minutes latitude. He also drew from a narrative of four voyages published in 1832, an account by Benjamin Morrell that became a bestseller. Poe used these real-life accounts as an attempt to hoax his readers into believing the novel was a true autobiographical narrative. In addition to the historical sources, Poe was influenced by other writers. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge was a general influence, and scenes of Pym and Dirk Peters in a cave also echoes similar scenes in Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. The Ship of Corpses recalls the legend of the Flying Dutchman, a ship which is cursed and never able to return home, which of course we also saw in Manuscript Found in a Bottle. Poe also incorporated the theories of John Cleve Symmes Jr. on the Hollow Earth. The theory of these works was that a hole in the South Pole led to the interior of the planet where undiscovered civilizations prospered. As Symmes wrote, the Earth was hollow, habitable, and widely open about the poles. This theory, which he presented as early as 1818, was widely held seriously throughout the 19th century. Symmes' theory had already served Poe when he wrote Manuscript Found in a Bottle, based partly on Symmes' theory of the concentric spheres, published in 1826. Manuscript Found in a Bottle is similar to Poe's novel in setting, characterization, and some elements of plot. Other writers who fictionalized this theory include Edgar Rice Burroughs, Jules Verne, and L. Frank Baum. In describing life on a long sea voyage, Poe also drew from personal experience. In 1815, a 6-year-old Poe, along with his foster parents, traveled from Norfolk, Virginia, to Liverpool, England, a journey of 34 days. During the difficult trip, young Poe asked his foster father, John Allen, to include him in a letter he was writing. Allen wrote, "Edgar says, 'Pa, say something for me. Say I was not afraid of the sea.'" The family returned to the United States in 1820 aboard the Martha and docked in New York after 31 days. More recent to the time Poe wrote his novel, he'd sailed during his military career, the longest trip being from Boston to Charleston, South Carolina. The novel is structured around a series of voyages, each greater in scope than the previous. The first voyage on the Ariel takes place in chapter 1. The novel is a compendia of Poe's themes. It edges inexorably toward the apocalypse, the unavoidable condition of wisdom. In the novel, we go clear around the earth upon the sea. This is the total voyage of discovery hinted at and sketched in early journeys into Maelstrom and in the journal Cast Adrift in a Bottle. Here's the discoverer exploring the body of this world, exploring it with his own body. Some critics have charged that the narrative is shapeless and chaotic, a sprawling mess of compulsive repetitions which betrays its author as an obsessive neurotic, not as an artist at all. Poe is not always in control in this narrative, but he desperately tries to control what is almost beyond control. And that struggle to master the uncontrollable is the very theme of Pym's narrative. It is objected, for example, that the same horrible misadventures are repeated ad nauseum. So why so many voyages? Why so many entombments, and so on? Pym's 5 departures and the redundancy of action are an embodiment of the meaning in the narrative.